important to our panel. So I will be moderating our panel. You've already met Alenka, obviously, and Vassilis, but who you haven't been introduced to yet, perhaps, is Mario Baghos, who is a senior lecturer in theology here in our... I paused the applause and then it fell through when I stopped for him. And he will be giving a paper after this. So you may not have met Mario before, but he's joining our panel. I'm hoping that this can be a bit more of a live interaction and discussion, but I've got some kind of icebreaker questions here. What I might start off with is some more general ones, and then I definitely want to bring back up the potential hologram of Christ idea and get the panel members' ideas about that. But I think something that would be interesting to hear from our panel members, given their understanding of history, is something a bit about how Catholic and Orthodox Christianity has a very different approaches to images compared to the other monotheistic religions. And we saw kind of this present through history, but then we saw during the period of the Reformation that unique approach to images start to kind of erode away in some Christian communities. So perhaps what I might invite the panel members to kick off on is the difference that the Incarnation makes to our images in our Christian faith, and what might have been the reasons, say, in modern Christianity, in some communities, that approach to images started to erode away.
Shall I start? Can you hear me? Okay. It's a sort of a complicated question, but at the same time it's rather easy. Now, let's start from the easy part. I mean, the differences between the mentality, the stance, the relationship with images in what we are used to call monotheisms is due to the different experience of the sacred in each of the so-called monotheisms. So basically we have Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, Islam is an experience of the sacred where the latter is totally, absolutely transcendent. So there is no actual connection, point of connection with the immanent. So that's why, for instance, you need a bridge sort of icon, which is the Quran, or in some other versions of Islam, the Prophet or the Imam. So because of this absolute transcendentalism, let's say, of the sacred in Islam, you don't have the experience of iconicity we have, for instance, in Christianity, of course. Now, in Judaism, the notion, the experience of the sacred, the experience of Yahweh, is, of course, transcendent, but at the same time, or at times, immanent. Yahweh is a God that, appears and disappears, happens and unhappens. So his relationship with the material, the historical and the immanent can be captured. For instance, in the Ark, let's say, of Covenant, but then that's it, no more, nothing more. So there cannot be a sustained relationship with the material. And we come to Christianity, where the relationship to the sacred is, the dialectics of that relationship is one of an integral relationship between immanence and transcendence, most eloquently and tellingly expressed in the doctrine of Chalcedon, where we have, the divine in the human in the divine. So iconicity, in a way, is the natural, so to speak, implication and ramification of this understanding of the sacred.
And Vassili, your mentioning of Chalcedon is symptomatically when we get the emergence of the first icons, portable icons at least. We have images beforehand, but the earliest Christians, in the martyrological texts, we see them discerning the presence of Christ in the dying martyr. That never goes away. There is an association of images, at least the statues of the Roman emperors and the Pantheon, the Greco-Roman Pantheon, an association of that with idolatry, forbidden of course, in the Old Testament Decalogue, and of course Christians refuse to worship anyone but Christ as God. At the same time, in those early centuries before Chalcedon, you have images emerging in the catacombs which are apologetic in nature almost. They're trying to communicate to Greek-speaking, Greek-educated Romans who are worshipping in the catacombs or burying their dead, whatever it is at the time, that there is one like a Son of God figure that you might find parallels in your own religions. For example, you have Orpheus depicted as a type of Christ in the catacombs. Orpheus is the ancient Greek demigod who pacifies nature. And this might seem scandalous to us today, post iconography, post Renaissance, post Baroque, because, well, that's a pagan god. Yes, but the earliest Christians, in a manner consistent with St. Paul on the Areopagus, tried to point out, well, look, here's a form, right, that we have in common, a divine figure pacifying nature. We'll fill in the content for you when we talk about it. That it is Christ who truly pacifies nature when he walks on water, for example. So, moving on from that early period, you have an apologetic taking place, not just in a positive way in relation to Greek texts, not necessarily statues. There are no statues of Orpheus in the earliest catacombs or later in early churches, but you do have the appropriation of the motif of the emperor as the traditio legis, okay, the one who passes over the law. So the emperor gives the law in imagery to the Senate. Well, the earliest Christians said, great, we're going to replace the senators with Saints Peter and Paul, and it'll be Christ, the true lawgiver, who's giving on the gospel. This is in the catacomb of Saints Marcellinus and Peter in Rome. And then jumping forward another 100 years or so, we have the doctrine of Chalcedon that you referred to, Vassili, that there is one Christ in two natures, divine and human, fully divine insofar as he shares the the divine essence of his Father, fully human insofar as he shares our essence when he was born for our salvation through the Virgin's womb, but without sin. And here we have the beginnings of a representational art in the portable icons from Sinai, for example, of Christ Pantocrator giving the blessing of peace. You've seen this image on PowerPoints presented throughout this conference. One Christ, half his face looks human, the other half stern as judge, divine, right? An incarnational mentality that isn't elaborated upon until a bit later, and I don't want to jump to that because he's the expert, I'm not the expert, so I'm going to stop now. I'm going to pause.
So I just want to say that I don't think that the Oriental and the Western approaches are so different. So if we are looking, also the art in Italy, in the south of Italy, we see this iconic and iconographic representations of the Christ and the saints and the Mary. Also I would like to say that also in the Orthodox churches, with years, for example, in Russia, beginning of the 18th century, the icons became very similar to Western painting. So it's very complex, the question, so we cannot just consider it in this one way.
And then perhaps someone could add something about why it is the case in post-Reformation Christian communities there perhaps is a reversion back to this weariness of images.
Yeah, that was the second part of your question, your initial question, and that's an interesting, addition or reflection, if I may say. Why are there certain, Christian traditions coming out of the Reformation? One wouldn't normally expect them to denounce the dialectics referred to previously. But why is this happening? Now, when we talk about iconicity and icons and images, basically what we're talking about is different relationships to historicity. Now, in my understanding, the Reformation is characterized by a paradox. In the name of history, it denounces history. So let's go back to the first church history, ignoring the church, which is history. This creates a conundrum, let's say, and a very, very uneasy relationship with historicity itself and the, let's say, the means of through which historicity is attested. And that is the icon, that is the image. Because, and this is something very, very interesting, even in the Orthodox iconography, because we tend to regard Orthodox iconography as something mystical, something of the interior, of the existential. But we seem to forget that a church, let's say an Orthodox church, with a full iconographic program all over it, all over the place, is basically a depiction of the historicity of Christianity from the early ages till the moment of your own self as a participant in the congregation. So it's about images, alive and not alive, cohering within a space which is the lit space of historicity. So I think that certain Christian traditions of the Reformation do suffer from this paradox of accepting and at the same time affirming and negating historicity. They have this uneasiness with the icon. Of course, this uneasiness is in a way balanced, I may say, or fixed by a superabundance of a certain icon, which is the cross. The cross dominates everything. And it's very interesting that this does remind us of the Iconoclasm, because the Iconoclasts were not against icons. That's a wrong premise. That's a wrong understanding. They were against a certain, or to put it better, they were for a certain icon. Only one is the icon, or basically, let's say only two, or three, if I may. The Eucharist is the icon, no other icon. The cross, and of course, the dynasty, the emperor. It's the first time that the iconoclastic dynasty is a proper dynasty because of its eschatological, assumptions. So the icon, you don't need icons. Why? Because you have the emperor, the dynasty of the Isaurian dynasty. You have them, and they are in Hagia Sophia performing the liturgy and the sacrifice under the cross. That's the whole icon you want. You don't need any other icon. And that's the whole crux of the matter.
And that apocalyptic dimension, which affected the Isaurian dynasty in the 700s AD in Byzantium, in the capital city Constantinople, basically came from the lack of anthropomorphic imagery in Islam, because they were losing territory to the Muslims. So it's not for no reason that you have all of these apocalyptic texts talking about the emperor of the last days around this time. It reinforces your point about the emperor as another last icon. And in those texts, like the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius, the cross descends from heaven onto Golgotha as the emperor puts down the imperial symbols of power, the scepter and the crown. So this is very much in the textual evidence.
There's lots of processes there that coincide, that converge.
in relation to what you asked about similarities and differences now between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, in the first millennium, it's a common tradition. If you visit Rome and go to any of the churches built between the 9th century and the 13th century, even post the schism in 1054, when they were still commissioning artists from Constantinople, the Roman pontiffs were, it's all Byzantine. If you go to Santa Maria Maggiore, Santa Maria Trastevere, right, you'll see the Byzantine apses, mosaics in the apses of Christ and the Mother of God. Paradoxically and almost ironically, while the Byzantines were kind of rediscovering in their own Renaissance the texts from classical antiquity, ancient Greek and Roman texts that placed an emphasis on the human form and its symmetry that we would see translated into sculpture with the Renaissance in the West, they never implemented it. Because why? Well, certain sensitivities regarding the icon coming out of their experience and defeat of iconoclasm, but also because they were conquered by the Ottomans. So it's not for no reason that those Orthodox Christian nations, if you like, what we now call Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, etc., they remain on the level of icon, and that remains the highest level of artistic expression, and they're venerated, and this is something that the West doesn't deny. There are icons in Catholic churches, obviously. But then with the Renaissance in the West, you get this additional element which was exaggerated until it plateaued. You know, realistic and humanist paintings, Michelangelo, Raphael, all the Ninja Turtles, the great masters, and so on and so forth, right? And that becomes canon, and you have a divergence, but just to invert it, because I want to refer to what Alenka mentioned earlier, whilst Orthodoxy would refrain from including statues in its worship, even to this day, most Orthodox traditions, nevertheless, in a place like Russia, which was influenced under Peter the Great by Western reform, St. Petersburg, his city, is influenced by Baroque. So you have statues of the saints in the thoroughfares, but still not in the churches. Within the churches, the icons took on a more Western flavour, softer tones, and so on and so forth. But there's interchangeability. Yeah.
Alenka said that's good. So everyone, we don't have much time. So what I do want to do is, since this is theology in the third millennium, I want to come back to this idea of the possibility of unprecedented representations of Christ and being able to represent also the rationality of his humanity, whether it be in the form of holograms that you can engage with live, or some sort of android where we're putting our human ingenuity to try and be at the service of mediating or bringing people to knowledge and love of Christ. And I know many of us would be uncomfortable with the idea of it, but as I said at the end of my paper, I wonder whether it's just because it's foreign to us, or whether in fact there is a principle in reason. Sorry, there is in principle, I should say, a reason why even when this technology becomes available and it becomes a normal part of human culture, we should not be employing it to create living images of Christ that you can engage with. So we don't have a lot of time, but I might just want to hear from everyone, just as a final point, on where they would stand in support or against these AI representations of Christ.
Well, I just want to say, I think this is one point we can learn from the iconography, that an representation which can be put in the church or in the praying space, or I don't know, has to be born from the experience of the church. So it's not the genius of someone or the i.e. But the image which permits to pray, to get in contact with God is always the expression of the ecclesial life and the experience of sacramental life. And so I think, well, we don't, we could not go beyond.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, personally. On the one hand, and now I would like to speak from what we could call a position of radical orthodoxy. To recall, you know, the well-known movement, both in the Anglican and the Catholic, and to some extent the Orthodox Church. Now, from a radical orthodoxy point of view, the hologram presents a big plus, which is it is there, it functions, it happens, but once I take the plug out, it goes away. What can be more eschatological than that? It's so eschatological. You know, it's, you know, in a way, it self-deletes, self-destroys its own functionality. Which is, you know, the affirmation of historicity in the guise of technology, and the negation of historicity. So you don't make an idol out of it. That's one side of the whole point. Now, of course, there is another side, which is modern technology, and especially for holograms or anything that has to do with AI, it has two issues that are problematic from a Christian point of view. Again, a radical Christian point of view. One is that it seems to go so much against materiality and the concomitant dimension of materiality, which is historicity. Which means that you, using a hologram, you risk losing the sense of materiality that an image, either an icon or a statue has, or a human person has, as flesh. And of course, you risk losing the very complicated program that the traditional iconographic tradition has built up. Another thing you risk is agency, because icons are located within the context of a congregation, of latria, worship, a very sort of integral unity. Modern technology has the tendency, if not the exclusiveness, to focus on exclusively my relationship with the machine. So there's no other next to me, with me. Nevertheless, I think that in the manner that theology is a certain grammar that includes and excludes the word of history in a way that it turns it into the word of God. In the same manner, iconicity is a grammar that includes and excludes. So I think that the iconographic, the artistic tradition of the church will find a way, I'm totally sure about this, find a way to incorporate new technologies in a way that they will promote the communal, the eschatological, and the historical material, which are very, very important for a Christian experience of the sacred.
It's very, very nuanced. Yeah, okay, very quickly. So, generally speaking, I would say that the images of God have to be made by the image of God in a very direct and palpable way in order to give it authenticity and meaning. I'm not entirely disagreeing with Vassilis, actually. The church will find ways to incorporate, but for me, as a bit of a purist, blood, sweat and tears has to go into it. So it's not for no reason that when Alenka was showing images, the icons of Rublev, he is Saint Alexander Lubyov, right? He's not just an anybody. There's an asceticism that goes into it, a life of holiness. And even though Caravaggio, we know that he's got a body count, right? He's not really a saint. Nevertheless, he killed a few people, okay? And yet we are, in spite of that, in awe of his work, because those Renaissance guys were on another universe. I don't know how history culminated to produce them, but it did, and we have them. And there are many examples of styles of art that diverge from the traditional iconographic within Orthodox parameters and other forms, which are phenomenal. If you look at French symbolist representations of Jesus, modern, 19th century Russian painters, Victor Vassilitsov, right, or Mikhail Vassilitsov and others. It's amazing stuff. It's in the sacred space. It's done by hand. It's done with effort. It's done with blood, sweat, and tears. I don't know that AI can do that if it's auto-generating. It's too separated from the hands of the one who's created in God's image, namely the human being.
Just want to add here, I thought, can you kiss a hologram of Christ? For instance, in the Orthodox tradition, kissing the icon is very, very important. It's very, very emotional. It's very, very relational. Perhaps we might lose that, and we might, gain something different.
Thank you, Ron. That was great. So if I can kind of sum up what we heard, we don't want Jesus to look like Mark Zuckerberg. That would be a concern. We want it to have an off button, and then we don't want it mass produced. I joke. Guys, please thank our panel members for this.